When a man experiences the sudden loss of certainty in a relationship or connection, it triggers a very specific kind of psychological response, one that is often misunderstood but deeply rooted in human behavior. Certainty, especially in relationships, gives us a sense of control. When someone knows you're always there, always replying, always initiating, always emotionally available, they begin to treat that as a constant, not a gift. And like anything that becomes predictable, it starts to lose its impact. This isn't necessarily conscious or malicious. It's just how the brain adapts. We stop valuing what we assume won't leave. Now, when you implement no contact, something powerful happens. You remove the certainty he had. He can no longer predict your next move. He doesn't know if you're thinking about him, if you're hurting, if you're waiting, or if, God forbid, you've already moved on. That uncertainty creates space for reflection, curiosity, and often anxiety. It's in that silence that his mind starts filling in the blanks. Oh, what is she doing? Who is she talking to? Why hasn't she reached out? Suddenly, you are no longer the person who was always emotionally available. You've become an unknown again, and people chase mystery far more than they chase consistency. And here's the twist. This return isn't always about love. Sometimes it's about regaining that emotional certainty. The ego hates to be unsure. If he felt in control before, your silence now creates an emotional vacuum, and people return to what gives them clarity. But here's where you need to be smart, because his return is not always a sign of changed intention. It may just be an attempt to reset the comfort he once had. That's why it's essential to look at behavior, not just words. What makes this powerful for you is that the no contact period forces the man to do something most people avoid. Sit with the consequences of their actions. When you're constantly reaching out or trying to explain, you're relieving him of that emotional burden. But when you're silent, he's left alone with the reality of what it means to lose you. And that's often when the emotional weight finally hits. Not during the fight, not the next day, but 2, 3, sometimes even 6 weeks later when the absence becomes real. This is not manipulation. This is psychology. People often need to feel the impact of your absence to appreciate your presence. And if a man comes back, it's usually because the silence confronted him with something he wasn't prepared for. His own feelings, his own doubts, and the stark realization that you may not be waiting for him anymore. And that loss of certainty, that's what turns a passive man into a pursuer again. Because now he doesn't know if he can have you. And that makes all the difference. When a man experiences no contact from a woman who was once emotionally present, something subtle but deeply powerful often happens. His ego takes a hit. It's not always about love, not initially. It's about significance. We all want to feel significant to someone. And when you were consistently available, responsive, or emotionally invested, he felt that significance, even if he took it for granted. Duh! The moment that energy disappears, there's a void, and that void can feel like rejection, even if he was the one who pulled away first. Men, whether they admit it or not, often attach their self-worth to how much power they feel in a relationship dynamic. If he knew you cared, if he could sense you would respond no matter how cold or distant he became, then part of his identity was built on that predictability. Your emotional availability became a mirror that reflected back his own value. When you go silent, that mirror disappears. He no longer gets the validation he subconsciously relied on, and that bruises the ego. This is particularly confusing for the kind of man who's used to women chasing him, accommodating him, or making the effort to affix things. He may not have realized how much he leaned on your emotional investment until it wasn't there anymore. And instead of thinking, she must be healing, his mind often goes to, oh wait, why isn't she trying to win me back? It's not a noble thought. It's ego-driven. He's measuring his worth not by your shared history, but by your present reaction to his absence. And your silence suggests that maybe, just maybe, he's not as important to you as he thought. That thought is what brings him back. Not clarity, not always regret, but the need to restore a sense of control over how he's perceived. He wants to know he still matters. He may message something vague like a hey, how have you been? Or I was just thinking about you. Soft entries designed to test the waters. But make no mistake, these are not random acts of kindness. They're ego resets. He wants to feel that if he decided to come back, he could. And your response, or lack thereof, will tell him everything he needs to know. This is why no contact is such a powerful shift in energy. It tells a man, not through words but through action, that you are not holding space for someone who didn't hold space for you. It puts his ego in check. And for the first time, he has to question his place in your life instead of assuming it. That sting to the ego might not be romantic, but it is effective. It forces him to confront his own value in your world, and whether he lost it through his own neglect. And often the return isn't because he realized you're the one. It's because he realized his absence didn't shake you, and for some men, that's the hardest pill to swallow. When something becomes scarce, its value increases. This is a principle that applies in economics, but it's just as true in human relationships. When you were always there, responding quickly, showing interest, checking in, your presence was abundant. And abundance, while comforting, can dull a person's appreciation. He doesn't feel the need to work for your attention because it's readily available. He knows, or at least believes, that if he disappears for a few days or becomes emotionally distant, you'll still be there when he resurfaces. But when you suddenly stop, when you go no contact, you create a vacuum. You remove something that he didn't realize had become such a constant in his emotional life, and that absence makes him take notice. He may not articulate it as, she's more valuable now, but that's the effect. Your energy, your responses, your validation, they're no longer on tap. He has to wonder where you are, what you're doing, and crucially, who you might be doing it with. And that's when the game changes. People tend to appreciate what they believe they can lose. Your silence introduces that possibility. And now, instead of being someone who was always available, you become someone who is selective with their attention. That shift from accessible to selective is what creates attraction. It signals that you have a life outside of him, that you aren't waiting by the phone, and that your worth doesn't depend on his validation. That energy is magnetic. He starts to view you through a different lens. You're not the woman he once felt sure of. You're the woman he now has to earn again. Scarcity triggers effort. When people believe something is slipping away, they suddenly recognize its importance. And this is where many women get caught off guard. Because the man returns, reaching out, maybe even sounding sincere. But what's really going on is he's responding to the emotional price increase. The same attention you gave freely before is now a premium he can't access easily. And that makes it desirable. The irony is that men often don't realize what they had until it's no longer within arm's reach. Your silence makes them feel that distance, and in that space, value is reassessed. He's not just thinking, I miss her. He's thinking, as she was valuable and I didn't treat her like she was. But here's the catch. The value he now sees in you doesn't always come from growth or insight. Sometimes it's just because you're gone. And that's why his return shouldn't be accepted at face value. It's easy to mistake his renewed interest for emotional depth, but often it's just emotional scarcity talking. What he couldn't be bothered to pursue before now feels urgent. Not because he's transformed, but because you're no longer easy to reach. And that makes all the difference. Men often process emotions on a delayed timeline, especially in the context of relationships. While women typically experience the emotional pain of a breakup or disconnect immediately, feeling the loss, grieving the connection, and working through the hurt, many men bypass that stage at first. Initially, they may appear calm, detached, even relieved. It may look like they've already moved on. But that's rarely the full picture. What's actually happening is that their emotional processing has simply been postponed. In the beginning, distractions come easily. Work, friends, dating apps, temporary flings, all serve as emotional buffers. He convinces himself that he's made the right decision or that it's no big deal. And since you're not reaching out during no contact, he assumes you're still there, still thinking about him, still waiting in the background. That assumption provides comfort, and in that comfort, there's no urgency to reflect or feel. But time does something important. It removes the distractions. When the excitement of freedom wears off and the noise dies down, the emotional weight starts to creep in. He begins to feel things he didn't give himself space to feel at the beginning. He remembers moments that meant something. He wonders what you're thinking. He plays old conversations back in his mind, and now, without the safety net of your attention or presence, those thoughts hit harder. They feel real for the first time. This delay in emotional response is one of the reasons men often come back after a period of no contact. It's not always because they suddenly gained clarity, it's because they finally felt something. The emotional numbness wore off, and in its place came regret, nostalgia, and confusion. He starts to realize that what he dismissed as a phase, or minimized in the moment, actually held more value than he acknowledged. But by the time these feelings surface, you've already begun to heal. You've already done the emotional heavy lifting he avoided. This mismatch in timing often leads to an unexpected text, a late-night call, or a vague message that seems to come out of nowhere. But it didn't come from nowhere. It came from delayed emotional awareness. No contact forced him to sit with himself. It removed the emotional cushion he had taken for granted, and now he's left to confront a space you used to occupy. The key for you is to recognize that his return is not necessarily proof of change. It's proof of discomfort. That discomfort can lead to growth, but it can also just be a temporary reaction to loneliness or guilt. Just because he finally feels something doesn't mean he knows what to do with it. And just because he misses you doesn't mean he deserves access to you again. Emotional processing isn't always aligned between people, and his delay shouldn't dictate your progress. You moved forward. Make sure that if he returns, he's not just catching up emotionally, but ready to meet you where you are now. When enough time passes after a breakup or period of silence, memory begins to play tricks on us. This is especially true in romantic relationships, where emotional highs and lows can distort the way we recall the past. For men who return after no contact, it's often not just about missing you. It's about how their mind has selectively edited the relationship. This is what we call the nostalgia and fantasy filter. And it's a powerful psychological lens that can make him idealize what you had, even if he once chose to walk away from it. In the absence of your presence, and especially without any conflict or tension to remind him of the breakup's cause, he begins to remember only the good parts. The late-night conversations, your laugh, your support, the way you made him feel seen or admired. He recalls how easy it was to be around you, how you understood him in ways others didn't, or how you were always emotionally present when he needed you. These memories start to float to the top because they're emotionally rewarding, and the brain clings to what feels good, especially when it's deprived of emotional connection elsewhere. Meanwhile, the difficult parts, the arguments, the unmet needs, the things you tolerated that you shouldn't have, get pushed to the background. Not erased, but softened. The brain does this to protect itself from discomfort. If he initiated the breakup thinking he was doing the right thing, then remembering all the things he lost creates cognitive dissonance. To resolve that inner tension, he subconsciously reframes the relationship as better than it really was. He starts to convince himself, or maybe I was too quick to let her go, or maybe I didn't give it enough of a chance. That's when he reaches out. The messages or calls may come across as sweet, warm, and familiar. He might say things like, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, or I didn't realize how much I missed what we had. And those words may be genuine in the moment, but remember, they are fueled by an emotional highlight reel, not the full movie. He's returning not necessarily because he's ready for more, but because he's been living in the version of the past that makes him feel safe and wanted again. It's easy to get swept up in that emotional energy, especially if you miss him too. But you have to ask yourself, is he remembering the real you, the real relationship, with all its complexity, or just a romanticized version that makes him feel better right now? Nostalgia is not the same as clarity, and longing is not the same as readiness. So when he comes back, reflect on this. Is he chasing the truth of who you are, or the fantasy his mind has constructed in your absence? Because if it's the latter, he's not coming back for you. He's coming back for a memory. When a man comes back after a period of no contact, it's not always because he wants to rebuild something real. Sometimes he returns for a much more self-serving reason, to see if he still has access to you. This behavior is subtle and often dressed up in friendly or nostalgic messages, but what's really happening beneath the surface is a control check. He wants to know, after all this time, after all the silence, can he still trigger a response from you? This isn't always malicious. In many cases, it's unconscious. The human ego thrives on affirmation, and when someone who once gave us love, attention, or emotional security goes quiet, it creates an emotional gap. That silence becomes loud. It forces the other person to sit with uncertainty. And for some men, that uncertainty feels threatening, not just because they miss you, but because they don't know where they stand with you anymore. That lack of clarity about their place in your life becomes uncomfortable, and so they reach out to regain that sense of emotional control. He might send a casual, "Hey, just checking in," or something vague like, "I had a dream about you the other night." On the surface, these seem innocent, but the timing, often after weeks or even months of silence, reveals the true intention. He wants to know if the door is still open. If you reply, especially warmly or quickly, it gives him what he subconsciously wants, reassurance that he still holds some emotional space in your world. Whether or not he actually wants to come back fully is often irrelevant in that moment. The goal was to confirm that you haven't fully moved on. This dynamic is particularly common in situations where he never fully committed in the first place, or where he was used to having the upper hand emotionally. If you were always the one reaching out, checking in, or holding things together, your silence disrupts that pattern. It takes the control out of his hands and places it back in yours. That reversal is what triggers him to act, not because he's had an emotional epiphany, but because he's unsure if he still has a hold on you. It's important to understand this behavior for what it is. A man who is truly ready to rebuild something meaningful will come back with clarity, accountability, and genuine intent. He won't just poke at your emotions to see if you'll flinch. He'll communicate openly and show consistency in his actions. But a man who is only testing his access will keep things vague. He'll show up inconsistently, stir up your feelings, and then disappear again once his ego has been soothed. This is why your response. How you react tells him whether you're still available for a story that's already hurt you, or whether you've rewritten the script. Because if all he wants is to test the lock, don't reward that behavior by opening the door. A man's return after no contact isn't always about you. It's often about what's going on in his world. Human beings are reactive, and when someone resurfaces out of the blue, it's usually triggered by something that's shifted in their environment, their emotions, or their sense of stability. Men especially are taught to compartmentalize emotions, so when life hits them, when they face loneliness, failure, stress, or even just boredom, they often reach for the last place they felt safe, admired, or understood, and sometimes that place was you. Imagine he's had a string of disappointments. Maybe things didn't work out with someone new, or his work life feels unstable, or his friends are all moving on with serious relationships. These shifts start to create emotional noise. In that discomfort, he begins to crave familiarity, validation, and connection. And that's when the memory of you resurfaces, not necessarily because of deep romantic longing, but because of how you made him feel in a time when things felt more certain. This kind of return is situational. It's not about realization or emotional growth, it's a reaction to temporary emotional discomfort. It's not that he suddenly woke up and saw your worth, it's that life suddenly felt heavy and your memory offered relief. You were at one point his emotional cushion. When things go wrong, people instinctively seek comfort, and if you were someone who provided warmth, empathy, or unwavering presence, he might come looking for that again. You'll often notice this type of return has a certain energy. It feels rushed, maybe even intense, but lacks real depth. He may speak as though he's missed you terribly, but his actions don't align. Or he'll lean into the emotional connection quickly, but avoid any real accountability or clarity about what he wants. That's because he's not trying to build something. He's trying to feel better. You're not the destination, you're the escape route. The challenge here is that it's flattering to be missed. It's tempting to interpret his return as a sign that he's realized your value. But always ask yourself this: what changed in his world? Did he face rejection? Did a new relationship end? Did his life suddenly become quiet or unstable? If his return is based more on what he's running from than what he's running toward, it's unlikely that his presence will be consistent or rooted in growth. You deserve someone who chooses you from a place of clarity, not crisis. Someone who returns because they see you, understand the cost of losing you, and are ready to do the work. Not just because they're tired, bored, or emotionally lost. A man returning during a low point in his life isn't always a red flag. but it's definitely a yellow one. Pause, observe, and ask, is he here because he truly wants me, or because I'm the soft place to land when everything else feels hard? There's a powerful shift that happens during no contact, not just for him, but for you. It's the moment he realizes that the version of you he once knew may no longer exist. And that awareness can be deeply unsettling for a man who once felt he had predictable emotional access to you. In the past, he may have relied on the idea that no matter how distant he became, no matter how many times he pulled away, you would still be there, emotionally open, receptive, and waiting. But when no contact stretches on and your silence holds steady, a question starts to rise in his mind. What if she's moved on? What if she's changed? That question alone can trigger his return. Not because he's sure of what he wants, but because the thought of losing access to a version of you that once centered him makes him feel unsteady. When he reaches out, he may be hoping that you're the same woman he left behind, one who still holds space for him, who still remembers the good times with a softness in her heart. But he's not just trying to reconnect. He's testing to see if time stood still for you emotionally. What he doesn't always realize is that while he was gone, you were evolving. You were rediscovering your worth, grieving what you lost, rebuilding your self-esteem, and gaining clarity. You began to see the dynamic for what it really was. Not through the lens of longing, but through the eyes of truth. The version of you who would have dropped everything to answer his late-night text or rationalized his emotional inconsistency is fading. In her place is a woman who is more grounded, more discerning, and less willing to tolerate confusion disguised as affection. And that's what unsettles him. It's not just that he might have lost you physically, it's that he no longer knows how to reach you emotionally. He's not sure what to say, how to act, or whether the old moves will still work. That uncertainty creates a sense of urgency, because when someone changes, it forces the other person to confront how much they've not changed. If he does come back, he may initially act familiar, hoping to re-enter your life as if no time has passed. But if you've truly done the inner work during no contact, he'll find that the dynamic has shifted. The emotional leverage he once held is gone. And if he's not ready to meet the new version of you, one who asks harder questions, sets firmer boundaries, and doesn't base her worth on his attention, then he won't last. Growth is intimidating to someone who hasn't grown. And your evolution, even in silence, speaks louder than any words. It tells him without explanation that if he wants a place in your life again, he doesn't just need to show up. He needs to rise to your level. So why do men return after no contact? It's rarely as simple as regret or rediscovered love. More often, it's a complex mix of emotional realization, ego, timing, and the power of your absence. Silence creates space, and in that space, a man is forced to confront his feelings, his mistakes, and sometimes just his discomfort. He may return out of nostalgia, out of loneliness, or because life didn't unfold the way he expected. But the real question isn't why he returns. It's what you choose to do with that return. No contact isn't just a strategy. It's a boundary. It's a declaration that your peace, self-worth, and healing come first. And if he does reappear, that boundary becomes your filter. It allows you to see clearly whether he's come back because he's grown or because he's uncomfortable, whether he's ready to build something meaningful or just seeking emotional reassurance. You're not here to be an emotional safety net or a temporary comfort zone. You are not a backup plan. You're a whole, evolving person, someone who deserves consistent effort, emotional clarity, and real commitment. If he can't meet that standard, his return should be nothing more than a reminder of why you chose distance in the first place. Remember, your silence spoke volumes. If he wants to be part of your life again, let his actions speak louder.